Good evening. Welcome to Fondation Bayerler. My name is Ulf Küster. I'm the curator of the current Hopper show, which is still closed due to the coronavirus. But the good news is that it's reopening again next week. We have very strict limitations of visitors, but still it's a beginning, it's a re-beginning. Nevertheless, today a little tour of the Hopper show in English. Please forgive my mistakes, it's not my language, it's more Dinglish or Lufthansa English than real English. If you have any questions also, you can ask them and we try to answer them at the end. Today, as I said before, some insights in the Hopper exhibition. The Hopper exhibition concentrates on landscape in Hopper's work. Hopper's concept of landscape is most easily explained by looking at this wonderful railroad sunset from 1929 from the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York. A traditional landscape shows a wide view, which is sort of framed by rocks and trees, and you see some people playing or working in the foreground. Hopper's not doing this. Hopper is blocking the view, and he's stretching the horizontals, in this case railway tracks, right to the edges of the painting. He blocks the view, stretches the horizontals, and in doing so he gives off the impression of the painting of the image only being something like a little part of something very much bigger, it's something extremely vast, which is beyond control. And in doing so, Hopper is sort of creating the modern cliché image of America as a very vast and wide country, the wide West, if you like. It's always with Hopper's paintings is that what you see is very important, but what you don't see, what you feel, is even as important, or perhaps more important than what you see. It's always the images are an invitation to see more. It's an invitation to feel. In this case, the landscape beyond, the bigness of the landscape beyond. It's a fantastic sunset painting. One could think of Caspar David Friedrich, German romantics. He was Hopper, new German. He was influenced by Romanticism, by the Hudson River School, of course. But he has created these more or less earlier paintings of his. He painted in 1929. He began to make these famous oil paintings only in 1924-25. He's sort of creating his unique style, and most fascinating when I look at this painting is always the green line, the green line which is sort of endlessly going on. It seems to be without end, and sort of indicating the wide landscape, the wide view in the landscape he intended to paint. Another painting in this room is Macomb's Dam Bridge from the Brooklyn Museum, which I like a lot. Not only the museum, but also this painting. That's different, but it's similarly composed, because Hopper stretches these horizontals right to the edge of the frame, and gives the impression that this is only a small part of something very much bigger. In this case, of course, New York. He's showing New York at the northern part of Manhattan. Macomb's Dam Bridge is connecting Harlem and the Bronx, and it's more a view of New York from the backyard. It's not a sort of picturesque view of New York. It's not Brooklyn Bridge, for example. He's more interested in these in the big city, which kind of fizzles out architecturally. In this region, there is no real architectural style, which one sees here. Sort of in giving the impression that this is something very big beyond the image. I have lots of fantasies about this little hut here, this little cabin. I showed this in one of my German online guided tours already. I think that the image of a cabin in such a painting is sort of an indication that Hopper wanted to show this contrast between the big city and nature and the isolated self in this little hut, and sort of referring to the back to nature movements in the 19th century, which is very important for American or even for hippie life and for the tiny house movement. And as I said, I have fantasies about this house, and later on we will see another very sort of strange cabin. I don't think that this cabin, which we saw underneath Macomb's dam bridge, really existed there. I think this is as I said, it's a sort of hint of Hopper to nature and the contrast between mankind surrounded by nature, even in this big city. But we already moved to the earlier work of Hopper, which is shown in this room. Hopper began as who was born in Hopper, who was born in 1882, began as an illustrator. He made illustrations for novels and newspapers and so on. And he always wanted to become a painter. And when he had enough money, he traveled to Paris and studied Paris there and looked at paintings. I didn't really study painting in Paris, but he looked at paintings there and was influenced by 19th century art. Especially, he didn't meet Matisse, he didn't meet Picasso, he was very shy. And then he came back and was very much attracted by distinctive American art, and he went out to the coast of Maine in the years before the First World War and painted the coast and the sea and the spree of the sea and the light and shadow of the on the rocks on the coast. That is fascinating to see how he sort of not imitates but sort of develops the style of another painter who is unfortunately quite unknown in Europe. His name is Winslow Homer. Homer written like Homer Simpson or the poet, and who actually had his studio not far from here. And Hopper, by doing this, by sort of trying to establish a very sort of American style, developed slowly his own style, which he later on became famous for. But this is around 1914. Only 10 years later, he made the paintings which he's famous for. Something which I think is quite interesting is how he sort of indicates the coastline only by this brush stroke of blue paint. It sort of fades out here. That's really something I always admire when I look at this painting. Here, clear influence by Courbet and Winslow Homer, the thick paint. Okay. We move slowly on, of course, like always, when one should talk more about many more paintings, but the time is limited. But I think we should concentrate a little on very significant works in the show. Like many painters, Hopper was interested in the relation between nature and landscape. Nature is always changing, and landscape is the ideal image of nature, which is not changing. Of course, the painter is only able to make images of landscape, because images don't change. But he was sort of working on this fine line between landscape and nature, and sometimes he wanted to make this really visible, especially in his Cape Cod paintings. He lived during the summer, during the summers from the 1930s onwards on Cape Cod, and had a studio there, a studio house there, I have to say. Especially in this very fascinating painting, you see his way to make the interaction between landscape and nature visible, because he's again sort of making this horizontal very visible. He's expanding the horizontal to the edges of the painting, and then he paints this very strange vertical thing, which I still don't know what it really should represent. It's just a vertical element, and then something becomes very visible, namely that this house is sort of sloping down this dune. Cape Cod is a spit, it's formed like this fist. It's located near Boston, on the coast, and the spit is growing. It's sort of wandering dunes, which at one point make the Cape Cod Bay to become a lake. And apparently he was very interested in this dynamic nature, which he found a way to represent here by showing this sort of vanishing house. It's as I say, it's a very dynamic place. There are letters he's writing about this desert-like sand, which is always moving, always this windy place, and I think it's quite fascinating to see how he makes this growing nature visible in this painting and in the other paintings here as well. I'd like to show you a postcard which we made and which is quite interesting. This is an image of President Obama in the Oval Office. President Obama likes Cape Cod because he has a holiday home there, but he, of course, chose these paintings which used to be in the Oval Office, which are now here. It's quite nice to imagine that. Well, this is my closest relation to the Oval Office, actually. The paintings which used to be in the Oval Office are now here. Apparently, Barack Obama, who knows about political significance in painting, he wanted to show that America is a nation which always invents itself, and this is actually happening on Cape Cod, on spits like Cape Cod, all the time. So the architecture has to be very light. It has to be. It's normally easy to remove it and rebuild it, and sort of start anew. And this movement, Hopper wanted to show. This very slow movement, one has to say. It's not speedy. It's a very sort of constant but slow movement, which is a constant element in Hopper's paintings. There are many highlights in this show, and I think one of the great highlight paintings is Lighthouse Hill, 1927, a lighthouse which he found, which is located on the coast of Maine, near Portland, Maine. And I think it's very fascinating to see how he paints the sea without painting the sea. He's sort of indicating waves by showing these dunes, and then he chooses the frog perspective here. So sort of you don't see what is beyond, but you see the light of the sun on the lighthouse, indicating this sort of vast nature around the vast sky, the sunlight, the vast country, the vast land, the dunes around these lighthouses. And lighthouses are, of course, points of orientation in vast nature. And especially this lighthouse belongs to some lighthouses which were established during the early years of the United States. There's a warrant signed by President Jefferson, who wanted to sort of mark this coast by lighthouses. This is orientation in vast nature. And that's what he paints here, and one instantly feels the vastness of nature and of the country. Hopper was very influenced by psychology and was very interested in getting involved with the unconscious. He wanted to paint the unconscious. So that's the reason why he always said that if there's a reason to paint, there's no reason to talk. Because he always knew that the unconscious is something one can't really describe. It is actually very, very private. And one of my personal highlight of all these paintings and of all these highlights in this show is this one, which is a view in the house where he was born in Nyack, upstate New York, on the Hudson River. It's the staircase which leads out of the house. Normally, it leads to a road which goes down to the Hudson River. But here, this sort of this way to his youth, or to the playground of his youth, because he used to swim in the Hudson and to sail in the Hudson. There's this collection of little model ships he made, which are preserved in this actually really wonderful birthplace of Hopper. He blocks all this by this fantastic wood, which is uncanny, but in a way inviting too. And overall, over the wood, you see this shimmering greenish light, which could be done by Magritte as well. I mean, there's a certain connection or relation to surrealism in his paintings. But Hopper was someone who liked literature, and he was very influenced by poems and poets, and one of his admired friends was Robert Frost, and of course this is Robert Frost's wood. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Of course, one of the most loved poems of Hopper was his preferred poem, which he liked to cite. And this is exactly the which we would like to go to, even during this lockdown. There's a sort of uncanny force outside. You can't say what it's really about, but there's the wish to go outside and sort of get immersed in this wood, on this wood of memory, the wood of unconsciousness. And I think this is all in this painting. And the more one gets involved with these paintings, the more one sees that Hopper is really someone who is showing things beyond the image. That's really his program. There's many other painters are doing this as well, of course. But Hopper is really someone who really, well, what he shows is really the beginning of something else, something bigger beyond. Of course, our key visual is perhaps the most fascinating painting in these lockdown times. Some newspapers always sort of reproduce this image and saying and write about that the situation the woman is in is our situation at the moment. We are confined to the interior and we look to the exterior, and there is a danger we don't see, but we feel, and I think this is wonderfully done. This situation is really sort of fitting to what we experience at the moment. Is she really looking outside? That's another question. Isn't she looking at this wall? But the question would be, why is the face lit, and where comes this light from? And then the contrast to the forest. That's Willem de Kooning's, the famous abstract expressionist, liked this forest a lot. He said, "This is a forest you feel. Even if you don't see it, it has a presence." Or is she only looking, not only, but is she looking to herself by looking outside? Is she reflecting on herself? So this is a really the image of the situation we are in at the moment, and hopefully we can escape this. But it's very moving to see, because one would like to go outside, but one is not allowed because of this danger, this unseen danger. And if all these regulations are loosened, or how do you say, are loose, or if the lockdown ends slowly, we might feel like this lady, which after 10,000 years, so for the first time, seems to look at sunshine and tries to go outside. And she hasn't done that very often during the last 10,000 years, because no one ever sort of went on this grass. She's very, very alone. And this painting, which is called High Noon, Hopper made a cardboard model to study the light. The play of the opened or not opened windows, the window shades, the sunlight in the window. There's a painting on the walls. Lots to see in this painting. Very strange and fascinating. That's from Dayton, Ohio, the Dayton Art Institute. Interesting museum, which I visited and like to be there, actually. The exhibition shows some drawings. Hopper was a fantastic draftsman, which is not that well known. He made preparatory drawings for his paintings, but he made also autonomous paintings, drawings, which are quite interesting and show that he was a very skilled draftsman. I especially like these studies of speed, of sort of bypassing trains. Some were perhaps on Cape Cod. So how he sort of makes speed visible, just leaves things out. I mean, leaving things out is the big trick of Hopper. I mean, it's only indicating things when he makes drawings. Drawings were done on a different speed because he very often drew from the back seat of his car. He liked to drive around in his car. Then he was always suffering from painter's block. He couldn't start a painting, so he forced himself to do something, sort of in sitting on the back seat of his car and then making drawings and or watercolors. And we even have a wonderful selection of watercolors. And the secret of doing watercolors, of course, is as well leaving things out, only indicating things. And I told you that I have fantasies about cabins on his paintings and on his watercolors. And there's another one, very strange. Why? What is this cabin doing here? Isn't this the cabin of a guy who wants to go back to nature and live isolated from everything, from civilization on the coast, like Thoreau did, inspired by Emerson and Goethe. And again, one of my favorite watercolors, first branch of the White River in Vermont. Hopper spent some time in 1937 and 1938, where one sees wonderfully the reflection of the trees in the water, as well as the shadow of the trees, so the reflection of the trees as shadows and the reflection of the trees in the water. It's a wonderful piece of art, seldomly exhibited. This wonderful haze, this blue haze, this romantic blue haze of these blue mountains. Great piece of art. And this one, of course, which again blocks the view, and you have the feeling that there's something much bigger beyond. Some scene on Cape Cod. He's leaving the sky out, but just when I came here and saw the evening light, I just immediately thought of this watercolor, because it was this whitish sky, very bright, and it's just paper. As I say, doing watercolors is leaving the unnecessary out. And the exhibition ends with this famous, iconic painting of this gas station, simply called Gas, from the Museum of Modern Art in New York, which is a typical Hopper painting in the way that it looks very familiar, but then you see this Hopper twist, as I always call it. The guy is a little too small. That's a little too narrow. There's no car fitting in, really. It's a sort of, it becomes to get a bit weird, you know, this kind of battle between the artificial light and the dawn, the vanishing daylight. His play with the mobile gas Signé, this Pegasus, the horse of the poets. which sort of flows over the wood, and this story tells that again the forest invites you to do a journey without end, with sort of no beginning and no end. Perhaps the journey to one's own memory, you know. Lots of things to think beyond this painting, and of course, blocking the view. What is this detail doing here? It just blocks the view. It's something very strange, very weird in this painting, which creates an instant atmosphere of sort of a cinematic atmosphere, of course. I mean, Hopper was very influenced by the movies, but he influenced the movies as well by sort of doing film frames which are the beginning of a story. That's why people like Alfred Hitchcock or David Lynch or Wim Wenders are so influenced, are so fascinated by Hopper. So that's it for the moment, unfortunately, because one could actually talk a lot and go on talking about many more paintings. The exhibition, thanks to our fantastic lenders and the understanding of our lenders, is prolonged until July 26th. That's really great. We can reopen on May 11 and show the paintings until July 26th. And hopefully the travel ban will be lifted and some more of you would come. Apart from that, the paintings of Hopper are everywhere, actually, more or less. With you, if you live in New York, I mean, you know that many of Hopper's paintings are in New York and at the Whitney Museum for American Art, who is actually the main lender. So we are very grateful for their help. Well, and are there any questions? There's a question: how do you decide the placement of the paintings within the exhibition? Well, that's very important. That's the central question. How do we place the works of art in the exhibition? Well, I actually always try to tell a story, and sometimes it works very well, sometimes it's working not very well, but the idea always is, you know, Billy Wilder, the film director, had of course 10 commandments, as we all have 10 commandments, but he had actually 12 commandments. The 11th was, you always should have the right to do the final cut, which is never working when you do an exhibition. But the last one, the 12th commandment, is really very, very, very important. That's never bore, or try to never bore. And if you do an exhibition, you should avoid being boring and sort of do a story, you know, like place things and make the visitor learn something about what you would like to tell. I mean, it's a it's a long answer to a very short question. Another is, who's the woman in Cape Cod Morning? Women on Hopper's paintings are always his wife, Jo Hopper. Jo Hopper was a painter herself. She was 1 year younger than her husband, and she was a painter, and she was his model, his muse, if you like. The marriage is said to be had been apparently very, very difficult, because she was very lively. He was very, very sort of very silent all the time, very shy, very silent. He was very tall, taller than me actually, but she was she was tiny. He was very lively, and that was sort of that was a reason of constant fights actually. That's quite something. But they stayed together all the time. And she was, as I say, she was his model all the time. Sometimes he changed her face, which I don't know if she really liked that. Another one. Hopper was influenced, but who did did he influence? Yes, Hopper was influenced, as I said, perhaps by French painters or by surrealists. Well, he influenced, as I just said, he influenced clearly filmmakers, film directors, and there are many painters who turn out to be big fans of Hopper. For example, Peter Doig. I mean, if you look at a Peter Doig painting, he was born in 1959, and we did a show some years ago about Peter Doig. If you look at a Peter Doig painting, then you see immediately he's a storyteller and not. I mean, Hopper is telling stories, but he indicates a story. That is something Doig does as well. Peter Doig, big fan of Hopper. People like Georg Baselitz, for example. All these painters who do a narrative, Neo Rauch, for example, as well, who are interested in telling a story and doing something which is traditionally connected to painting, are influenced by Hopper, very much so. Any other question? How would you place Hopper in relation to his European contemporary artists? He has come to be defined as so American. Well, the problem is that he is very American in my view, and that he very much influences the view of America we have today. America, this uncontrollably big country, this vast land. Well, he had a contemporary in Switzerland actually who was doing the same, whose name is Ferdinand Hodler. Ferdinand Hodler invented the Alpine view, the modern Alpine view. He sort of did something similar with the Alpine landscape in Switzerland. And if you look at the fantastic views of the Alps by Ferdinand Hodler, you see that Hodler, who didn't know Hopper, did something similar just a little before Hopper. Hodler died in 1918, so, but he sort of made this image of the Alps as an apparition, and sort of indicating that the Alps are what the Alps aren't, and sort of that the Alps have something to do with the identity of Switzerland very much. Sort of creating this cliche of Switzerland as an alpine country. So that there's a certain relation. One should think about connections between Hopper and René Magritte, the surrealist painter. I see a lot of Magritte in his paintings. I see a lot of Giorgio de Chirico. De Chirico is doing similar things with shadows, for example, cities and shadows, as Hopper does. Giorgio Morandi is doing all this quietness there, this sort of way of painting these quiet paintings. That's very Hopperesque in his own lifetime. I think that was your question. Okay. So thanks for watching, and I might do it again in German in some weeks or so. And if you can come personally and give us the honor to visit our museum. Apart from that, I have to say, apart from the Hopper show, we do many nice shows. And despite the virus, we are very keen on continuing to do this. So if you have time and travel by Switzerland, there's always nice art to see in this museum. Thanks very much. Thanks again for watching. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon in person at Fondation Bayerler. Bye.